Hello, I'm Kimberly Toohey, the registered dietitian from the Stratford Family Health Team. I will be completing the rest of the presentation, which will focus on providing you with the important information you need to know about food to help you manage and prevent diabetes. We know that the food we eat can affect our blood sugars, our blood cholesterol and triglyceride levels. It can affect our energy levels and blood pressure. And when we know how food can do this in our bodies, that can give you an important tool to help you manage your health. So in today's segment, I will be covering the first part of this outline. So all about carbohydrates, sugar, starch, and fiber. In the next video segment, I will be talking about the types of fat in our diet and the impact on our health, as well as sodium in our diet and how that can impact our health. In the last video segment, I will talk about meal planning for diabetes prevention and management and label reading. We decided to provide this information in video segments so as not to overwhelm you with too much information all at once. You have the choice to sit down and watch all of these video segments if you want to at one time. Go ahead and do that. That would be great. It would also be fine if you choose to watch them maybe one a day for the next few days to go through the information at a slower pace that may be right for you. So I encourage you to do what works best for you and for the time you have and the way you learn. I also encourage you to come back and rewatch any of the video segments if you want to remember what you learned or if you just want to reinforce what you learned. So moving on, I'm going to start talking about carbohydrates. So all food, it's made up of three parts: carbohydrates, protein, and fat. Each of these parts of food are important to help your body function at its best and to keep it healthy. Starting with carbohydrates today, because it is the portion of the food that affects your blood sugars the most. And it's important for you to understand carbohydrates to help you prevent and manage diabetes. Carbohydrate is made up of three components: starch, sugar, and fiber. The starch and sugar parts of carbohydrate get broken down into glucose during digestion and are absorbed into the bloodstream. This is the component that raises blood sugar. Fiber is a special part of carbohydrates, and we'll talk a bit more about it in a later slide. So it is important to include carbohydrates in our diet because they are our body's main source of energy, especially the brain. They help us to absorb other nutrients in our food and can help regulate our blood sugar. But it is important to be consistent with balance of carbohydrates that we eat over the day and consider the types of carbohydrates that we're consuming. So eating regular amounts of carbohydrates during the day can be beneficial for you because it can help manage your blood sugar levels, can prevent really high levels and then subsequent low dips in blood sugars, can also help regulate your energy levels, keeping them more even throughout the day. An example of eating regular carbohydrates throughout the day is to eat a similar amount of carbohydrates at your breakfast and your lunch and your supper. So carbohydrates are found in a variety of different foods, primarily in grains, which include breads, cereals, pasta, rices, etc. Starchy vegetables like potatoes and corn contain a large amount of carbohydrates compared to other vegetables. Fruits and fruit juices, milk and yogurt and dairy products contain carbohydrates, and of course sweets. So anything with sugar in it, like your cookies and cakes, candies, honey and sweeteners, all of those contain carbohydrates that can raise your blood sugars. Non-carbohydrate foods do not impact your blood sugars by raising them. So some examples of those would be your meats and alternatives, beef, turkey, chicken, fish, nuts and seeds, and cheese. And vegetables, except for those potatoes and corn that I mentioned earlier, which are considered carbohydrate foods. When it comes to other vegetables, they do not contain large enough amounts to significantly raise your blood sugar. So really, vegetables are considered a non-carbohydrate food, except for potatoes and corn. And combination foods are going to be affecting our blood sugars a little bit differently than just plain protein, fat, or just plain carbohydrate foods. And many of the foods that we consume contain a combination of those components. So some examples of foods that contain carbohydrate and fat are sweets such as cakes, pies, cookies, candies, ice cream, chocolate, and snack foods. Other combination foods might include some carbohydrate, protein, and fat. For example, pizzas and casseroles, stews, and soups. Because our body breaks down these different components of foods differently, the starch and sugar of carbohydrates can be digested into glucose, and glucose can be absorbed fairly quickly when eaten on their own. But when you eat protein and fat, that slows down your digestion, which then influences how your blood sugars are affected, because that slower digestion with the protein and fat when eaten with carbohydrates slows down how quickly that glucose is absorbed into your bloodstream, which helps your blood sugar stay in the target range and helps keep us full longer. So fiber, I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about that component of carbohydrate next. It is a bit special, and it's considered the best carbohydrate. It's found naturally in plant products, and the reason it's one of the best carbohydrates is because it has so many health benefits for us. We know that it plays an important function in keeping our bowel movements regular. It has heart-healthy benefits. It can help lower your LDL cholesterol and also helps lower your blood sugar levels, and it can help you feel fuller faster and longer, which can help with your energy levels through the day, and your appetite prevents you from feeling overly hungry all through the day. So what is the difference between high fiber foods and low fiber foods? Well, fiber is the part of carbohydrates that can cause a slower release of sugar. Similar to what I was saying about the protein and fat, which causes a slower release of sugar from those carbohydrate foods into your bloodstream, fiber acts in that same way. That slower release of sugar into your body can cause a more gradual rise in blood sugar, and it won't raise the blood sugar as high. So an example of how a low blood or high fiber food will affect your blood sugars is demonstrated by the graph here on this slide. The yellow line, you can see, does not rise as high as that red line, and it goes back down to that bottom at a slower rate compared to the red line. And on this graph, the vertical axis is referring to the blood glucose levels, and the horizontal axis is referring to the time. So 1 and 2 hours are indicated on this graph. So you can see with the yellow line, the blood glucose levels are raised to a lower level and over a longer period of time compared to the red line. So low fiber or refined carbohydrates cause a quicker and higher rise in blood sugars compared to those with fiber. So some examples of refined carbohydrates or low fiber foods would be something like fruit juice compared to fruit, which has the fiber in it, or white bread compared to whole wheat bread, which has fiber in it. The consumption of those refined carbohydrates without fiber can cause a rush of sugar into your blood really quickly. If you refer to this graph, it's the same one that was on the previous slide. You can see with the red line, that red line goes up quicker within maybe half an hour to a higher level compared to that yellow line. And then it also crashes down well below the yellow line by 1 hour. And when your blood sugar crashes down like that, that can leave you feeling hungry sooner. So the take-home message here is to aim to get more fiber in your diet. And these are some tips on how you may want to increase fiber in your diet to help prevent and manage diabetes and help your body regulate its blood sugar levels to get kind of that lasting energy benefit. So you may want to choose whole grains instead of the refined white flour grains. So whole wheat breads, multi-grain breads, or whole wheat pastas, brown rice compared to white rice, whole grain cereals like oats, or when you're reading the nutrition facts panels, the cereals that have a lot of fiber listed on the nutrition facts panel. Aim to eat 4 servings of vegetables and 3 servings of fruit a day. Fruit and vegetables contain fiber. They're those plant-based foods that have fiber in them naturally, and eating more of those can increase your fiber intake through the day. And maybe consider exploring some plant-based protein alternatives like your legumes, lentils. By legumes, I'm talking about chickpeas and kidney beans, navy beans, white beans, baked beans, black beans, etc. Nuts and seeds are also great sources of fiber. Maybe you can think of some other ways that would work in your patterns that would help you get more fiber. Next, I'm going to talk about added sugar. When a lot of people hear diabetes, they immediately think, I can't eat sugar. But what does that really mean? We do know that an excess intake of sugar can make it difficult to keep your blood sugars in the target range. If you think back to that slide with the red and yellow line in the graph, that sugar is a refined carbohydrate, so it can cause your blood sugars to raise higher and quicker, which makes it hard to keep that glucose level in the target range. It can also increase your triglycerides and decrease your good cholesterol. So we know that it can be a good thing to limit added sugar in our diet to prevent and manage diabetes, but it can be a bit tricky to figure out where added sugar is in our diet. It comes in a variety of forms, including honey, molasses, agave, syrup, maple syrup, or anything that ends in the word syrup, white sugar, brown sugar, icing sugar, table sugar, corn syrups, high fructose corn syrup included in that, and corn syrup solids, glucose and fructose, maltose, dextrose, and sucrose. Any word that ends in OSE that might be listed on an ingredient list of the food product refers to sugar. So it can also be tricky to find out if there's added sugar in a product just from looking at the grams of sugar on the nutrition facts panel, because that grams of sugar number refers to the amount of naturally occurring sugars in that food and the added sugars. So looking at the ingredient list is a good spot to find out if the company has added sugar to that product. So remembering the variety of forms that sugar can come in a product, you can look for those words in that ingredient list. And if you happen to see some of those words that mean sugar in the product, and it's in the first 3 to 5 ingredients of that product, that might be a sign that that food is high in added sugar, because they will list ingredients on the list based on the weight that they are in the product. So if one of the highest ingredients by weight in that product is sugar, that product is high in sugar. And if you are interested in knowing what the grams of sugar means in more of a common household measurement, for your reference, 4 grams of sugar is the same as 1 teaspoon of sugar. So if you look at the nutrition facts panel on a food and it says, for example, 12 grams of sugar in your cereal, if you divide that by 4, you'll be left with 3 teaspoons of sugar. So that can give you a bit of a reference. If you had a plain sugar that had no added sugar listed in, or no grams of sugar, would you add 3 teaspoons yourself? Maybe not. So maybe there might be an option there to choose a lower sugar cereal. And even if you needed to add a little bit of sugar, you might be able to add less than the product that you purchase that already has the sugar added into it. Another place where a lot of added sugar can sneak into our diets is through our drinks. Many beverages like pop and orange juice or other juices made from fruits, sports drinks, and specialty coffees contain a lot of sugar. The Heart and Stroke Foundation recommends to limit our added sugar intake to less than 10% of our total calorie intake of the day, and ideally less than 5%, but when the recommendations were made, they know that could be really tricky considering the types of foods that are in our environment these days. To give you a reference of what those percentages mean in terms of grams and teaspoons, for an average 2,000 calorie diet, less than 10% of total calories from added sugar would be about 48 grams of sugar or 12 teaspoons. Less than 5% of that total calories less from added sugar would be the same as 24 grams or 6 teaspoons of sugar. So then if you think of a can of pop, that contains 10 teaspoons of sugar, which if you enjoy a can of regular pop in a day, then that's certainly putting you really close to that total recommended amount from the Heart and Stroke Foundation. So orange juice contains 5.5 teaspoons. Sports drinks can contain 5 teaspoons of sugar. And your specialty coffees, it depends on what your order is and your size, but on average can contain 7 teaspoons of added sugar. Certainly when you got your own coffee, if you just got a plain coffee, you aren't likely going to add 7 teaspoons of sugar yourself, but when you buy some of the pre-made specialty coffees or go to Starbucks and get a custom-made specialty coffee with lots of sugar and syrups added to it, you can end up consuming maybe more sugar than you realize, or more added sugar than you realize in your diet. So that's definitely a place to reflect on and think about your habits. So when you're limiting foods high in sugar, these are some common foods to consider: regular pop, desserts, juice, candies, jam, honey. Those are all things that you might add into your diet that you might be able to consider limiting. And can you think of any other high sugar foods that might be beneficial? I encourage you to reflect on your own eating patterns and consider if you have added sugar in your diet on a regular basis, where it's coming from, and if you're maybe can think of some other things you might need to consider changing. And I always get questions about, what about natural sugar? Is that going to be better for my blood sugar management or to prevent diabetes? However, when it comes down to how our bodies digest it, it's all going to turn into that same glucose molecule, which is another word for sugar, that gets absorbed into our bloodstream and can raise our blood sugars. So natural versus processed sugar will still raise your blood sugars in the same way. So even fruit juice in this situation, I do consider a natural sugar. Even if you buy 100% fruit juice that is not, that does not contain any added sugar, it still is a very concentrated source of sugar and can raise your blood sugars very quickly. And so it is something to consider as an added sugar. And low-carb diets are all the rage these days, and I often get patients that come into my office and ask me whether a low-carbohydrate diet would be good for them. And especially if you have high blood sugars or might have just been diagnosed with diabetes, you might think, well, if I cut out all the carbohydrates in my diet, then won't my blood sugars be fine? Because if that's the part of food that raises our blood sugar, maybe just avoid them altogether. However, the answer is no, it's not necessarily going to be good for your blood sugar levels, and that's because there's that organ called our liver that has a storage compartment of glucose in our body, and when we don't eat carbohydrates and don't fuel our body with them, our body craves them because our body's main source of energy is carbohydrates, so it will cause the liver to release sugar into your bloodstream, even if you don't eat carbohydrates. And sometimes our liver can release too much sugar into our blood. That can raise our blood sugars as well. So one way to prevent our liver from putting too much sugar into our blood is to eat enough carbohydrates throughout the day at consistent times to keep the liver's function muted. Also, when you follow a low carbohydrate diet, there are some other risks. As I mentioned, our body craves those carbohydrates, so it's going to look for sources of it in our body if you're not eating it. Our liver is one source, but our muscles are another place where our carbohydrates are stored, and our body can start to break down our muscle fibers to turn that into carbohydrates to run on. And when you're getting your muscle protein broken down, you're going to end up being a little bit weaker, which is not a good thing. You don't like to see your muscles getting broken down. That can also impact your muscles in your heart, which could put you at risk if you have heart issues. As well, low-carb diets can put you at risk of nutrient deficiencies, as well as inadequate fiber intake, falling into the restriction binge cycle, and yo-yo dieting or weight cycling, which we know can have harmful effects on your body's ability to regulate the sugar in your blood. So the take-home message here is that no, you do not need to follow a low-carb diet. There are some potential risks from choosing to follow one, and I encourage you, if you're considering if this is a good choice for your health, to talk to a registered dietitian to help you evaluate what the best way to manage your blood sugars could be. So some take-home messages about carbohydrates are: carbohydrates are important because they give the body and brain energy. And eating similar amounts of carbohydrates throughout the day can help you manage your blood sugars and energy levels. So for example, having the same amount at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And choose higher fiber carbs more often, like fruit, vegetables, and whole grains, as they will cause a more gradual rise and fall in your blood sugars. And limit the low fiber carbohydrates like juice, regular pop, candy, desserts, and honey, because they can raise your blood sugars really quickly and leave you feeling hungry sooner. So at this time, I want to take the opportunity to invite you to reflect on what you just heard and your own personal habits. Is there something in your habits that you think you would like to add into them to help manage or prevent diabetes, or is there something you'd like to adjust that you think might have a positive effect on your health? If there is a habit you'd like to work towards, I encourage you to set a SMART goal around that. Now, a SMART goal is one that is specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, and has a time frame. So, for example, it may be that you want to start eating carbohydrates more regularly throughout the day. Maybe right now you don't eat very much at your lunchtime. So that could be a simple goal like, I will start eating a carbohydrate at my lunchtime. So I'll choose a slice of bread and maybe put a sandwich filling on it, and that'll be my carbohydrate at lunch. And I'll try to do that every day for the next 2 weeks. And then in 2 weeks, check back on that goal. Either set a reminder in your phone to remind you that you set your goal and to think back on it, or ask a friend or a supportive family member to help you check in with that goal and see how it went. Evaluate that. See if it went well, or if it didn't work, maybe you weren't able to do that. What worked well for you, what didn't, and maybe revise that goal to make it more realistic for you. Or you may think that went well and you want to choose another habit. And so I'd encourage you to go through that process again. Taking those small steps again and again, you'll eventually climb that whole staircase and you can create big change through making small, sustainable habits that can last. So I thank you for listening to this segment today. If you have any questions or concerns, please contact us. You can call the Family Health Team at 519-273-7013, and the admin staff there can get you connected to either Lisa or myself to answer your questions, or you can email us at our email address is listed on this slide there. So Lisa's email there is almurray@sfht.on.ca, or myself, I am k2e@sfht.on.ca.